So my name is Sarah Milligan. I'm with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the Oklahoma State University Library. Today I'm talking with Madison Williams about her experience during the COVID-19 pandemic in Oklahoma. We will be focusing most of our time talking about their role as a student during this time, but I'll also be talking about some more general questions about life in the last couple of years. This project is supported through the Institute for Museum and Library Services American Rescue Plan grant funds. All right, I think I got it all. Okay, so I would like to start with a little bit of just your background information. So just tell me a little bit about yourself, like where are you from? Like what do you like to do? Just a little bit of framing information.
Okay, so I am born and raised in Oklahoma, particularly south of KC, the Moore area.
Mm-hmm.
I went to more schools. I got the quintessential Oklahoma raising in that every other year there was a tornado.
Especially in Moore.
Especially in Moore. I love to stay at home. I'm really a homebody. I had a really great growing up that led to that. And I was born and raised OSU fan. My family grew up going to football games, and so I grew up on campus, and so that really led me to coming here and being a student.
Okay, so and tell me, just give me a little bit of context for what you were a student. What do you do as a student here? How long, like when did you join OSU's campus? And then we'll go backwards from there.
Yeah. In high school, I decided that I was going to major in history because I had a really great history teacher, and I was looking into history programs around the state, and I looked at OU and UCO in addition to OSU, but none of them felt quite like home like OSU did. And I saw the history program, and I was like, that looks like fun, and so I was like, okay, I'll go there. And so I honestly chose OSU mainly because of the the campus. I felt like home, and everyone felt inviting, and the honors college is really nice, which I was in honors college, but I really love history because I love to research things. Mm-hmm. And OSU has a really great history program. So.
Mm-hmm. So history major. Do you have any minors?
I have a geography minor, which came kind of by accident. I kept taking geography classes because, it got me my lab credit, and I really don't like doing science. And so I was like, okay, I'll play with rocks for a while. It'll be fun. And then I kept taking other geography classes, cultural geography, all those sorts of things, because I knew that it would help me with history. And so then I was looking at my degree check sheet, and I was like, well, if I take this one other class, I'll have a geography minor anyways, so I might as well go for it. So it just kind of happened by accident.
I think that's how some of the best things do happen.
Yeah, the history degrees are really flexible. You can shove a lot of things into them.
That seems to be true.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll do a little chronology here. So if we're thinking about COVID as a pandemic, sort of started to really have a bookend around March 2020. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about when you first, what you were doing and where you were at when you first kind of realized that this was something that was different, that what was happening with this public health thing, with this virus, was sort of different than just a regular virus.
I think I realized it a couple weeks earlier than most people my age, because I was supposed to go on a study abroad over spring break of 2020. And so I was paying attention to what was going on around the world, because I was like, if it gets to a point where we're not going, And so, a couple weeks prior to spring break, they canceled the business study abroad to Italy. And I was like, okay, well, that's not me. Fingers crossed it doesn't become me. And so I kept a close eye on what was going on around the world, and I was like, okay, this is starting to be a pretty big deal, hopefully it doesn't get too big too fast. And then ultimately on the Sunday before I was supposed to leave. Like, we were supposed to leave on a Saturday, the Sunday before they canceled the trip. So less than a week before leaving, and they canceled it. And I think that was maybe around the 7th or so of March. And so it was like a week before everything in the country shut down, before that one NBA game. And so, you know, I was aware that it was like coming, but then it like happened. And so my plans got upended, you know, I feel like before most people my age, because people still went on spring break trips in the country, you know, but I didn't get that opportunity because I was overseas.
So was your study abroad going to be during spring break?
Yeah, we were going to be gone just over spring break, and we were going to Berlin to look at the city and like, you know, what the city looks like today and how the history impacted the city. And it was supposed to be really fun. But OOHRP decided it wasn't going to be safe, which, you know, they waited to the last minute. They wanted to make sure that we weren't missing out, but they decided that it was better off if we just didn't go, which was really rough because then I came back to school and everything was still normal, you know, and all my friends were talking about their spring break plans and they were still going. And
yeah. So you thought you were leaving on like the 7th, but you just came back to school on the 9th, and spring break went until that following week, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was at home packing up my suitcase and everything because I was flying out of Stillwater. And so I had my suitcase and all my bags and stuff ready to take back up to school to pack for. And then I ended up just having to leave it all at home because I was walking out the door when I got the email. So, yeah. And then, of course, within that same week, you know, the trip got canceled on Sunday, and then by Thursday, the university had canceled classes for the 2 weeks after spring break. Like, they were like, okay, it's going to be online. And so then everyone else was like, yes, 3 week spring break. And I was like, okay, great. You know, and so then I had to pack up more stuff at school to take home instead of leaving.
Yeah.
So
where were you in studies at this point? Were you a freshman?
I was a freshman.
Okay.
It was my first year. I came in August 2019, and I didn't come in with a whole lot of credits, but I was like really close to being a sophomore in credits that semester. Like, I was just kind of on the cusp, but I was still considered a freshman, and I like to think of it that way because it was still my first year. So I had never like experienced a spring semester before, and so it just got kind of short.
Yeah. So, you let me just like rephrase that. So it was, you found out you were going to go on your travel abroad spring break. Did you just go home instead? You just went back to more?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have an option. I mean, I could have stayed up at school, but it was going to be 3 weeks long. And so, you know, there was no point in staying up there for 3 weeks just to be in online classes.
Right. Well, and so you found out 2/3 of the way through spring break, I think, is when they finally said, like, we're not coming back to in-person classes for the next 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that. Like, how did you feel about that? What were you thinking about that? And also, like, what was your family having conversations about like that?
It was so weird because every time they announced like another restriction, we were like, okay, great, we'll just go home. Because my mom also teaches high school, and so she was being pushed back home too. And literally that first day that they announced that we're not coming back, they were like, okay, here, sign up for time to move out, you know, and go do whatever. And so I moved out of my room, that very first Monday that we were supposed to be back in class originally, like the first day before they had even gone online for 2 weeks.
Okay.
Which my mom actually made a post. She's like, I can't believe this is what I'm doing, like the first day after spring break.
It's like a Facebook post.
Yeah. But, you know, like we all just moved back into my parents' house. Like, I went home. My mom reorganized the home office and cleaned it out. My sister was living in an apartment with some friends at the time, and her friends had a falling out, so she moved back home too, and she was in the restaurant industry.
Is she older than you?
Yeah, she's 22 right now, but not by much. But she was working as a server, and so she didn't have a job either, but she just came back in. So we were all in the same house for those couple of months, and my sister was actually in the process of applying to come up here to start going to college, because she decided to make that change in her life. And so she was trying to fill out all the forms and get registered, and so she was having her very first advising appointments over Zoom. like in the exact same like office, and like I was right next door doing Zoom classes, and my mom was trying to teach all of her students too, and so we were all we were using a lot of Wi-Fi in those days.
Yeah.
So,
Well, how did that go? Speaking of Wi-Fi, did you all have problems with that?
surprisingly, we didn't. We've always had like really crappy Wi-Fi at home, but I mean, it really was a trooper during those days. Like, I think the biggest problem was finding like quiet places where you could like sit down and work, because we only had so many desks. Like we haven't had a desktop computer in our home since 2010, and so we don't really have a whole lot of desks, and you can't just sit out in the dining room because that's where the dogs bark, because they're very loud, and so I would do most of the work in my room because that was like the most quiet space, but I'd be sitting up on my bed, and then I'd start having my back hurt, and so I couldn't just relax on the bed because I was on Zoom. So
what did you all do to rearrange the space, or if anything at all, after as those weeks moved into more weeks?
Yeah, I mean, my mom definitely cleaned out a lot of stuff because those rooms had kind of just become places that we just piled stuff up, and so she cleaned out. We had a garage sale later in May, but cleared off all the desks, and then she had a spot where she could put her stuff when she wasn't using it, and I took my stuff, and so we would just like rotate out and be like, oh, when did you need the office again? Like, when is your class? And so it was, we made sure that the desk and all the areas were like completely cleared off, so we could just bring in our stuff and rotate it out.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. So then you can have desk spaces when you
when you really need it. So.
When you mentioned like that you came back and you like moved out of the dorm, were they telling you had to yet at that point? That seems a little early.
It was kind of difficult because everyone had a different situation. Like there were some people who couldn't go home, but we had a lot of foreign exchange students at that time, especially in the hall that I lived in. They couldn't just go home, but they were like, okay, here's an option. If you want to go ahead and move out, you can. Like, here is a time to sign up. You'll just move all of your stuff out, and then that'll be it. And so since, I would start having to go back to class, my mom had to teach, we decided to do it that very first day, just get it out of the way. So I think it was an option, but they were really wanting us to like move out. They were like, if you have to stay on campus, after these 2 weeks of move out time, you have to, apply for it and give a valid reason. Like they didn't want anyone on campus, really.
What hall was that?
It was in Stout Hall.
Stout.
Yeah.
So do you remember like what you were hearing during that time period on the news, or where were you getting your information about like what was going on?
I would like to say that I watched the news a lot, but I know that I didn't. Because, I mean, it was always the same information over and over and over again. And, I'd see, like, a news segment of, like, the Navy hospital ships pulling into harbors and stuff. I'm like, we don't have that. We're in Oklahoma. And so it was always talk about, like, what was going on the coast, like, in New York. It was always about New York and, big things. We didn't really experience a lot of that during lockdown. Mm-hmm. Like, for us, there wasn't much going on in Oklahoma. Like, they didn't talk about the hospitals being overwhelmed or anything. It was just, flatten the curve. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I didn't watch it as much as I probably could have.
Yeah, there's no judgment here.
Yeah.
But I wonder, like, were you just sort of listening to what the school was telling you, or was there more specific Oklahoma things, or were you listening to like parents or other adult figures, or?
I mean, when it came to like coming home from school and like doing classes and all that stuff, I obviously listened to what the university told me to do because I didn't really have much of a choice. Like, if they want me to move out and I have the ability to, I might as well. I'm not going to sit up there in my tiny little room and do Zoom classes, mm-hmm. Which then became the thing to do. But when it came to like grocery shopping, my mom was like, oh, let's try the grocery pickup and all that jazz. And so we tried it a couple times, and for those first couple of months. But then, I mean, by May, my mom was like, this is tedious, it's whatever. But I mean, everyone wanted me to stay home, the university, the news stalkers, they were like, just stay home. So I did, because I didn't have any reason to go. I didn't have any classes. I didn't have a job.
Yes.
I had worked on campus in one of the residence halls at the desk, and everyone had moved out, so there's no desk to be open.
Yeah. Did they keep paying you even afterwards?
They did. I got the job in late February of 2020, so I worked, I think, maybe 8 hours before they sent us home.
Oh,
so I got hired right at the very beginning, which was fine. But then they paid me about $40 every paycheck until we were supposed to get out of school, which wasn't a lot by any means, but I had gone like a solid maybe year without any type of income, so to not be working at all but still get some money, that was really nice.
Mm-hmm.
And that came from the state, so that was nice.
What do you mean that came from the state?
I think it was a state issued thing. Like they made that. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but I know it wasn't like federal money because I worked for the university and it was like a state thing because I'm technically an employee of the state, or I was.
Okay. So like a state proclamation or grant or something.
Yeah, something like that.
You referenced earlier like that people didn't know what to expect or whatever, talking about like spring break planning, things like that, because the NBA game hadn't happened.
Yeah.
What is the NBA game that you're talking about?
I don't remember who they were playing, but it was a Thursday night. I think it was March 13th. It was a Thunder game, which it was in OKC, which was really great to be put in the national news for that. But one of the players on the Thunder tested positive for the game, like maybe 2 hours before the game started. And so then everyone was like, no, we can't have this. And so then, the NBA canceled all of their games, and then everyone followed the example of the NBA, down the line. And so it started with that one player testing positive, and he had been talking about he was feeling fine, like days or hours prior. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Thanks. I just want to make sure I had that right.
Yeah.
So you basically stayed home through, it sounds like sometime in May?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, I stayed at home until I moved back to school in really late July. But from like March to May, we never left. Like we would go do grocery pickup, but we didn't go out and do anything. We didn't go out and eat really like at any restaurants or anything. We just always, like my dad would go out and get something to go and bring it home for us to eat. Mm-hmm. But then in May was when we kind of started venturing out a little bit. Like we would go shop in store, mm-hmm. Instead of just picking it up.
Were you worried or were you afraid during that time?
Honestly, no. I mean, it felt weird being around a lot of people at that time, which I can't remember if it was like before or after masks became a big thing, because I know that they weren't. But I mean, you definitely felt like you still wanted to keep your distance from people, which I mean, to this day, I'm still like in big crowds. I'm like, let's spread out a little bit. But, you definitely felt like you wanted to keep away from people. And then if someone like coughed around you, you'd be like, can you not do that, please? Mm-hmm. But I mean, like actually like going out in the public, I wasn't like terrified or anything. I was just, stay away, please. Mm-hmm.
So when you did start going out again, it seems like maybe masks were a little bit more widely endorsed. That would have been probably sometime in May is when it started to become more widely pushed, at least in Oklahoma. Did you wear masks during that time?
I did. We we bought our masks from Old Navy. We bought some reusable ones, which we had like surgical grade masks that my mom had brought home from school that they used to use in her labs. And so we had those, but they were running out. And so we got the reusable ones, and my dad hated them so much because they hurt his ears because he has a really big head. He still hates them to this day. But I would wear my mask, no problem. I mean, it made me feel a little bit safer, especially when people would like cough all over the place. But I mean, if, they were like, you should wear a mask, or even if they didn't say like, you don't have to wear a mask, whatever, I'd still wear it because I don't want to get sick.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first time you ever put one
on? Like during COVID or just in general?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. Did you wear masks before that?
I remember distinctly in junior high, I decided I was going to mow the lawn. Because we have one of those zero-turn mowers, and it looks really fun, and it is really fun. But I'm really allergic to grass, and my allergies are really bad. So my mom brought home some masks for me to wear whenever I mowed the lawn, so that way I wouldn't get all up in my nose and stuff. Which eventually, those were actually the exact same masks that we wore during the pandemic because they were at home. Because we were like, I think we have some masks out around here somewhere. Which those masks were really nice and they were like really well produced compared to the ones that are done now.
Yeah.
But I remember, it was like I could only wear it for like a little short amount of time because it would start getting all sweaty and gross and I couldn't handle it. But when we started wearing them during the pandemic, it wasn't like we were like wearing them outside for long periods of time. Like it was like we were indoors, so it wasn't awful. But, at first it was hard to get used to like, having breath, and I wear glasses, and some people had problems with it fogging up. So,
did you not have problems with it fogging up?
I really didn't that much. The masks that I wore most of the time, I wear them really high, so they come up right here below my eye. It's only when you wear them lower that it kind of fogs them up. So I never had a problem, which was so weird.
Mm-hmm. I know that is a thing for people. That's why I asked.
Yeah,
you figured out the trick. Do you remember, well, I guess I should ask first, have you ever had a COVID test?
Yes. I think the first time I was tested was when I moved back up here for school, because they tested every single person who moved back on campus, ever, which was a lot. But since I worked at the desk in residential life, they tested us after we had moved in. Like they had us move up there, and then they tested us a couple days later because they didn't have it set up yet. And it was rough.
What did you like? What was rough about it?
It was, I think, well, okay. That first test wasn't super rough. It was in the back of your throat, but they had it really efficiently set up to where we just walked in and walked right back out, and it was over in like a minute and a half.
Where did you get it done? Do you remember?
It was done at the Colvin Center.
Okay.
So you walked in the front doors, went off to the right by the bathroom, and they had like 6 or 7 stations set up. And then, of course, everything was spread out 6 feet apart, and then you walked out through this back door back around to the front. So it was all one direction, which everything those days was one direction, even if it didn't make sense. And so, but they did throat swabs, which was really nice because I think that was like one of the few times where I actually had a throat swab instead of a nasal swab. Mm-hmm. I hate nasal swabs.
So, like, clarify with the nasal swab, it's
up there and it feels like it's tickling your brain, and it's the worst when they have to do it in both nostrils instead of just one. But
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting about this that they're, the progression of testing, right? We went from not having a test to then having a test, but then it was nasal test, and then it was a throat test, and then it was a combination of, just sort of how that changed over time too. Mm-hmm. So talk to me a little bit about this summer 2020. So you were in between your freshman and your sophomore year of college. Were you eager to come back? Were you questioning what that would look like? Were you thinking that maybe you didn't want to come back? Like what was going on?
Well, I was actually in classes over the summer. I was taking online classes, which I had decided to take before everything shut down because they actually waived the online fees, like in anticipation, like, oh, here, take some online classes, because it'll, they moved all the classes over summer online when they changed to, online, whatever. And so I was like, oh, I'll take those, I'll save $300 per credit hour, or $100 per credit hour, so $300 per class. And so I took advantage of that, and I took 2 classes, and that was kind of nice. But
what were the classes? What history classes?
I was taking I took meteorology, which was one of my geography classes, and I took history of the Second World War, which to this day was like the most well-organized online class I have ever taken. Yeah, that professor really knew his way around campus. But that entire summer I was like, this online classes, they're nice, but, I feel like I'm not doing as much as I normally do in like actual classes, which I felt that during the spring too, because there were some professors that are like, okay, we're going to cut down on the amount of assignments we have. We're not going to meet in person, like we're not going to have this, but then there are other professors who just kept it going. They're like, okay, we're going to still do this. We're still doing this. It's on Zoom every day. So that was a big difference.
So what did you prefer?
I prefer that when they cut it down a little bit, like when they adapted it to be online. Like, I don't like the professors who teach in online classes if it were in person, because it's not the same. But I also don't like it when professors completely cut it down to where it feels like you're not learning anything because it's online. In that one class that I took, the history of the Second World War, he used a combination of like, he had video lectures, but then he also had like pictures and like key documents to look at and like other things, and it was all really well organized. So you get a different types of materials and stuff, but it didn't feel like an in-person class,
Before we get back to the summer, because that reminds me, how, like, when you were in those flipped classes, in the sort of late spring of 2020, and everybody had to move online, which meant faculty who had expected to teach in person were now trying to also figure out how to, as you just mentioned, right, like deliver this in a different way, and some more comfortable with that than others. So did you have much communication from your professors in those classes? Did you have much invitation for discussion on what was going on, or was it more just like business, get through the semester?
A lot of the times, I mean, after those first 2 weeks, some professors had already made up their plan. They were like, okay, here's just how we're going to do it. We're just going to make it through the end of the semester. Because everyone thought that, we'll just have to make it through the end of the semester and then it'll all be over. That was the really big mindset. And so they were like, okay, whatever, you'll do this, you'll pass. And so, I mean, they were like, just stay home, stay safe. That's it. Okay. We didn't talk about it super in depth. It was just kind of we just got to make it through 6 weeks. So.
All right. So the summer, which is my original question for you. The summer, so you're taking online courses, which you're already kind of planning on doing anyway. So you're taking these online courses. And it's sort of also this middle point between finishing that freshman year and what's going to happen in your sophomore year.
I had no idea. I mean, given the state and where we're at, the amount of COVID cases that we had, plus just politics and stuff, I was like, we're going to go back to like a Stillwater in some shape or form. There were schools on the East Coast that were completely online and all that stuff. And like the fact that administration hasn't said anything that we're going to be strictly online or anything like that just shows that we're going to go back in person. I didn't know what it was going to look like. Because I mean, when we registered for classes, right at the very end of the original spring break. So they were already supposed to be in person. And so, but I can't remember when they decided this, but they were like, the professors will get to choose to what degree their class goes online. And so, some people, they knew that, okay, we're going back to school, but we don't know what classes we're going back to. Like, all we know is that there's going to be some type of in-person instruction. I mean, for those who lived up in Stillwater off campus, I don't know how they decided all that, but for me, it was like res life. It was like, okay, here, we're going to go ahead and move in as this day. Here you go. You're going to be back on campus living. So.
Do you feel comfortable with that?
Yeah. I mean, after being stuck at home, like for 2 months and not leaving at all, I was ready to go. Don't get me wrong, I love my family, but my grandparents live with us in our house, and they're a lot.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a lot of
That's
people.
understandable.
Yeah, it's a lot of people, and we were stuck at home, but I really wanted to go back up to school. I wanted to be back in person in classes. I am very much an in-person learner. But I also really wanted to go back because my sister was supposed to come up to school for the first time, and she had always wanted to go to college, and she had gotten her associates from OOHRP, but she didn't get like the traditional university experience, which I think she decided to do that because I had done it and was like, I don't want to miss out on this, and so I wanted her to be able to come up here and experience it. So
yeah. So whenever you came back, like, just talk to me about that. I mean, it sounds like there wasn't ever a question in your mind that you were just going to keep going through college and that you're going to ride the wave through whatever that meant, is what it kind of sounds like, right?
Yeah.
So talk to me about, like, your feelings when you came back and talking to other friends or college students and then sort of restarting that class again semester. And I'll frame this real quick with sort of like where we were in numbers for COVID in the state during that time period. We hadn't really had high numbers in Oklahoma, through the summer. And really, as school was opening, had not seen like really high COVID numbers from the testing that was available, right?
Yeah. Coming back to campus was so weird. I moved back in like July 27th, like before most of Rise Life staff, like all the graduate assistants had moved back, but none of the CM, the community mentors and RAs had come back yet. But when we moved in, nothing had changed in the building. Like it had been untouched since March, which was so creepy. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, what's some examples of that? Yeah.
Like, the furniture was in the same place. It wasn't trash, but there was like, things that you could tell, like, some students had left this here, or the furniture was still set up as if they had just had a late night game or whatever. Like it was like exactly the same. There were still posters from events all over the place. And so it was like exactly the same. But then when, the CMs and the Rise Life staff moved in, they started taking, like, putting stuff up. And so they put down stickers that said entrance only, not an exit. And then this stairwell is up only, one person on the elevator at a time. And then the weirdest thing that they did, which I still don't know why they felt this was necessary, they saran wrapped every piece of furniture in the common space. Like they put a tarp over it and then they saran wrapped it. Like, so you couldn't sit in there at all, which I thought was kind of ridiculous because I felt like you could have kept some of those chairs out, just like 6 feet apart, like one chair, because a lot of students use that room and go sit in there and talk to their family on the phone instead of doing it in their room so they don't bother their roommate. And then they kept those wrapped all year. But it was weird watching them do that. And then when everyone else started to move back on campus, all the residents and stuff, they would walk in and they'd be like, why did they do that? Like, there were parents who came up to the desk and asked me, they said, when are they going to take away the saran wrap? And I was like, I don't know. I didn't have the heart to tell them that they had done it the day prior, And so, a lot of the stuff just happened like right at the very beginning of the year.
So what were some of the things that they did in the dorm to try and, I don't know, well, like what are some of the things that they did in the dorm? So you talked about them saran wrapping, really managing the common spaces, but what about the rooms themselves? I mean, did roommates go back together?
There was no change. I mean, obviously this was so funny. They took every opportunity to make the space like not, collaborative in like the common spaces. They surround our furniture. They made the stairwells one direction, which that building, Stout was built in 1948. it was not built to be one direction. And because you could tell, because if you followed the signs, you couldn't get into the basement where the laundry room was. And then they were like, you can't sit in the hallway, like you can't have any of your belongings in the hallway. You have to wear your mask. But then the second you're in that room with the door closed, there's no rules. You know, like you'd come in, drop off all your stuff, and like organize a little bit, but you could have your mask off while you did that in the room. But then the second you stepped outside of the door, you had to put the mask back on. Like you could be in the hallway with your roommate that you live with, you know, with no mask on, and you would have to have your mask on even if you were going to the hallway. You have to wear your mask when you go to the shower, which was annoying. Which I mean, I'm in the traditional style dorm, so you know, not everyone had to do that on campus, but I had to, and I was. There were so many times where I walked out with all my stuff, and I'd have to turn back around just to go get my mask.
Yeah.
So.
Did they explain it all, like what the reasoning behind some of those things were?
Not really. No.
Yeah. So how did it go as the semester continued? So that's really coming back and getting settled in, and then living in the dorm, trying to manage the instructions you all are given.
Yeah.
But you know, how did you feel as the semester went on?
It was rough.
That's
the best word to say it. Well, first of all, a lot of people didn't know what their classes were going to look like until just a couple of days before the semester started. Because we were waiting for the campus page to pop up and give us our syllabus. And we had no idea, like, even like the banner system, the registration system, it would change up to a week before classes started. And so everyone was kind of waiting, like, all my classes were originally in person, and then I only had one in person I only had a couple classes in person that semester. So then, you know, everyone was waiting for that, and then everyone was in the hall all the time, but you never saw anyone because they were all in the rooms. Which having a roommate and having online classes doesn't always line up. My roommate is very much a night owl, which I'm a kind of a night owl too, but I got up earlier than she did, and I had class at 9:30 in the mornings, and she didn't. So she'd be asleep in the bed right next to me, and I'd be in Zoom class. And you know, you couldn't necessarily, you know, go to the library and sit. You'd have to sit there with your mask on the whole time on a Zoom class, which, you know, sucked because I loved going to the library, but I didn't want to sit and work with my mask on for hours on end. So. But I mean, it definitely took a toll because like the longer you go in online classes and you're just sitting in the same room, which those rooms are not very big, like they're half the size of this room, and this room is not big either.
So like, what, probably 10 feet by 6 or 8 feet.
Yeah.
10 feet by 8 feet probably.
Yeah, not very big. And you're sharing that with another person who also has online classes, and so you'd both be sitting there at your respective desks on a Zoom call with, you know, cameras on and in silence.
Yeah. Did you have any of your instructors require you to have your cameras on?
Yes, but no. I mean, a lot of times they really wanted you to have your cameras on, but in those early days, nobody ever wanted to be like, hey, turn your cameras on, you know. Like, they would have something in their syllabus, but they wouldn't necessarily yell at you if you didn't, especially because not everyone had, like, the technology. Like, some people didn't have cameras that worked, or, you know, there's only so much you can do. Which, of course, you know, later on in the semester, people were like, come on, turn your cameras on. I know that you can have your camera on, you just don't have it on because you don't want to be here, you know. So that was a big dynamic change. Because, you know, the more that we got used to Zoom, the more we knew what we were capable of and what we did not want to participate in. So.
Yeah. We'll talk about that. I mean, it sounds like it was really frustrating to try and stay motivated and with everything being locked up or, you know, like where you were kind of required to be in one space and then having to do online stuff for most of your, like how did that, as the semester went on, you mentioned like you just kind of stopped caring for some of the things, like was there Were there things that went better than others? Like things that worked out better than other things?
Yes, but no, not really. I mean, professors realized like they were just as fatigued as we were. Like everyone felt it. You know, everyone was tired of being completely online. Everyone was tired of sitting in front of the camera. I mean, professors were tired of students turning off their cameras. I mean, my mom even felt that in her high school classes. She would sit and talk to a black screen all day. So, I mean, some professors would try to get us to do discussions, and some professors, like my Spanish teacher, would call on us by name. Like, you know, if you were in there, she'd call on you, and so you'd have to be ready to, like, hop in, and I always hated that. But, you know, sometimes that got us to participate, sometimes it didn't. But I would take an online asynchronous course, like, you know, where I just did it all my own pace over a Zoom course at this point in time, because I hate Zoom.
So what was what were your in-person classes like?
They were empty. I had one course, it was a history of popular culture since like Civil War. And there were about 10 or 11 of us at the beginning of the semester. And professors weren't allowed to count off for attendance because, you know, if someone got COVID, they had to accommodate all that. So they weren't able to give a grade for attendance or anything. By the second half of that class, it was regularly just me and one other person. I think one day it might have just been me and the professor in my class.
Was everybody else sort of synchronously watching online or asynchronously watching recordings?
I don't even know. I couldn't tell you. You know, I mean, I'm sure some people did. I texted one girl. I was like, hey, I haven't seen you in class recently. Like, are you okay? Never responded. But I saw her on campus a couple weeks ago, so I was like, okay, she's fine. She's just not doing the class anymore. But, you know, that was like that for every class. Like, everyone just slowly started to drop it off, you know. But I did have another in-person class that semester that was in person, but it was an honors seminar, and students were a little bit more dedicated with that. And we did discussions and stuff, and that was like the most normal class I had during like the whole year of 2020.
So how did you feel being in a classroom with other students? Because at that point I think they tried to spread everybody out and they had mask policies and all that.
Assigned seats.
And
You could only sit at the chairs that had the number in front of them, and then you had to go by your number and sit in the same spot. And there wasn't really a whole lot of room to talk to people. You know, it wasn't like you could ask questions like, "Hey, did you guys start working on this yet?" Or, you know, like I didn't talk to anyone in any of those classes that semester. You know, the only people that I did talk to were people that I had known from other classes previously. And even then, it wasn't a whole lot.
Yeah. So how did it go with friends?
I had one really good friend that year. I had a group of friends when I was in freshman year, and we kind of split up before COVID hit. And so I had one good friend, which we didn't talk at all over the summer. But that was, you know, kind of like the nature of our friendship. When we weren't together, we didn't really talk. But, you know, I spent a lot of time in her room. Like we spent a lot of time together, just the two of us, and we'd go out and do things and run errands and whatever. But I didn't really make any new friends that year too much. I mean, I made a couple of work friends that I would interact with when we were switching off shifts. I became friends with my sister's roommate, and that lasted until she graduated in December, actually just now.
Oh,
yeah.
2021?
Yeah. So that was kind of fun. But I mean, I didn't necessarily make any super close friendships because, you know, if I was going to stay home, which I'm a homebody, I mentioned that, like I'm fine with staying at home. And so if, you know, there's nothing getting me out to go do something, no event, I'm going to stay in my room. So.
What'd you do for fun?
That's a great question. I sat on my phone. I sat on my phone like almost all day, every day. I mean, which that sounds really bad, and it is really bad. You know, I would read a lot, but I mean, I focused on schoolwork. we would have movie nights occasionally. We'd go talk and do stuff, but most of the time I was just sitting on the phone. Like I didn't do much outside.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had a core group of friends that you sort of hung out with. Did you all ever have a conversation about, like where each other went, or who you were exposed to, or was there ever any conversation about, like, or a worry that you all were gonna, spread COVID?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why, you stick with just like a couple friends is that you know who you're talking to, and my friend had a lot more friends than I did, like, outside of that from her major. But, we knew that we were comfortable with just the two of us, and so she'd be like, oh, this one person in my class or whatever got sick, I'm going to go get tested, and then if she tested negative, I would be fine, like it wasn't a huge deal, but I mean, we made sure that if we came into contact with someone who did get sick or had COVID, then we would go get tested. Or even if they just felt bad, we'd be like, okay, let's go get tested. And then if we tested negative, that was the end all be all. Okay, we're fine. We're good.
Were you worried about getting COVID?
I wasn't worried about myself getting COVID. I was worried about my grandparents getting COVID. I didn't want to go out and do all this stuff up here because I was coming into contact with more people up here than I was with my grandparents at home, even though I was a recluse. So I was like, I know if I get sick, I can make it through, but I don't know about my grandparents so much. And so, most of the time I just kept up most of that because if I did want to go home, I didn't want to take that with me.
Mm-hmm. Did your grandparents pretty much stay at the house, or did they do other things?
My grandparents stayed at the house. My grandparents have stayed at home for many years before COVID. Mm-hmm. They don't get out too much. My grandpa loves to watch classic movies all day, and my grandma loves to read. But their lives didn't change too much. Mm-hmm. I mean, their lives became more active because everyone was at home with them now. But they didn't really go out too much. My grandpa had some health issues and stuff, but mm-hmm. The hospital that they went to was really restricted, limited. That's not a word. I don't know. But he had to do physical therapy, and instead of going to somewhere to do physical therapy, they had someone come into the house and do it at the house. Mm-hmm. So mm-hmm. They would make my dad take their car out to go drive because it hadn't been driven in a couple weeks. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So how did you kind of evaluate risk over time? So you were trying not to get COVID because you didn't want to take it home to grandparents if you visited. Yeah. And you and your friends were kind of like, if you knew you were exposed to someone who tested positive from COVID, you would go and get tested and just make sure that you didn't have it that day. Mm-hmm. So how did you evaluate risk over time, and did it change?
Well, okay, when we first got up to school, it was really low numbers. There wasn't, I was looking at the OSU COVID dashboard instead of the state or whatever, because that was what I was concerned with. And I was like, okay, really low numbers, whatever. And then when I saw the spike at the beginning of the year, I was like, okay, I know that's just because they're testing everyone. Higher testing numbers equals higher positive numbers.
But this was August, September, you're talking about?
Yeah, it was in September. And everyone being in close quarters, I was expecting that. Which that was when everyone was super careful. Nobody was really mask fatigued or anything at that point, to the extent that they were later on. And I honestly, I wasn't that concerned about it changing over time. I wasn't worried about, people getting sick, as they went to events and stuff, football games and stuff. The risk level for me stayed relatively the same all through that semester. I didn't think about it too much aside from I didn't think about getting sick. I thought about how just it was impacting all my classes and social functions and stuff. I didn't think about, that.
Yeah. So did you just keep wearing your mask that whole semester when you were out and about?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have much of a choice. Everywhere had a mask mandate. But even if it didn't, I probably would have, just because it was an extra, sense of, safety. Like, it was, almost a safety blanket at that point, which I had gotten a lot more masks by that point, and so I was able to match them with my outfit, which I still do today. I still have so many. I'm such a matchy person, but, I had no problems wearing it. It made me feel safe, but it also made other people feel safe,
So moving into the new year, right? There was Christmas break. There was all the holidays that happened, Thanksgiving, Christmas break. There was lots of conversation around that on to family gather or not family gather, and then sort of numbers went up and down. So maybe talk to me a little bit about how you and your family, or you and your friends, or just you handled holidays.
Really funny story. We were going about our business, relatively the same. We didn't do anything super special in terms of COVID for holidays. We didn't take any super precautions. But then on Christmas Day, I remember this so vividly. Christmas Day, we had a dinner. It wasn't even Christmas Eve. It was after we had done most of our events and stuff. My uncle comes over, and his voice sounds weird. And it was sounds so deep. And I had not been around too many people, and I was like, can he not do that? Can he just not? Because he was just talking and talking and talking. And my dad, we called it a man cold at the time. We were like, no, you just have a cold. It's a man cold. It's whatever. And then finally my grandparents get sick, and they go get tested on the 28th or something, and they have COVID. And so then my parents go get tested, and my parents don't have COVID. I was asymptomatic. I didn't have anything, so they wouldn't test me because that was when everyone was, getting sick. And then the next day I was like, yeah, no, I really need to go get tested. And so I went and got tested, and I had COVID. So I thought it was so ironic. Out of all of the time that I spent up here around people, and I never got it, but then my uncle gave it to us, which I don't know where he got it. I'm assuming it's him. I'm not sure. He didn't get tested until after my grandparents had gotten tested. Which it was really scary with my grandparents, but I was fine. I just felt kind of sick. But so we got that over break, and so that's how we entered the New Year's, and everyone in the house was sick. Even my sister and her boyfriend, everyone.
Yeah. Did you all just stay together then?
Yeah. Well, I wish I could say that. My uncle stayed at his house because he lives alone. But since we were all in the same house, I was home for break. We all just stayed home. My parents tried to get me to watch Cobra Kai. It didn't work out. Because it didn't work out because we all fell asleep. We were all so tired, and it was I think it was the Delta variant. It was a new variant of COVID, and so it hit us all. Which my grandparents, it was pretty scary. One night, my grandpa was trying to get up and go to the bathroom, and he slipped and fell. And my grandma couldn't lift him, so I had to go lift him up, and it was kind of scarring in the imagery. But I recovered relatively fast. My parents recovered relatively fast. My dad was trying to go back to work, and they wouldn't let him because he kept testing positive, and he needed a negative test, which I think they eventually gave into that because he had been, asymptomatic, whatever, for weeks. But my grandparents took a really long time to recover from that. It had been 2 weeks since I tested positive. I felt fine. I came back up to school to work and go to class and all that jazz. And my grandma was still really sick. Her doctor had told her if you don't get better by the next time I see you, you're gonna be admitted to the hospital. And then I came up here and I didn't hear anything. We just never talked about it over the phone, which I don't talk to them too much. But then the next time I came home, she was perfectly fine, and I was like, it was a complete 180. But yeah, we all got hit at the exact same time.
That's how it works with this one, right?
Yeah, which, we all stayed at home. We did a grocery pickup instead of, going into store like usual. But my sister, she doesn't make a lot of great life choices. She moved into her new apartment with a boyfriend after she had tested positive. She had tested positive, and I was like, okay, let me move to this apartment the next day. I'm like, you should probably wait until you're not positive, but she didn't listen to us. So
And that's a hard one because you either see people or you don't see people, right?
Yeah.
Well, and what was the, what was the news you all were hearing by that point? Were you paying attention to?
Yeah. Well,
you knew it was a Delta variant. I mean, you knew that there was a new variant, so you're obviously hearing something. But
well, they're always talking about like everyone traveling, and it always shows pictures of a bunch of people in the airport walking with their suitcase. And I'm like, we didn't do that. I'm the only one who traveled, and I just drove 60 miles from Stillwater to OKC. Like it wasn't, none of us traveled. It just happened like that, which I don't know if that. I really don't know how we got it, but it was just because we had like that one dinner together that it just all happened.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was so weird being like, okay, they're talking about the rising cases and protect yourself, but I'm like, I'm already here. I'm a part of that curve, which is so crazy because one of my one friend got it at the exact same day. Like she tested positive on the same day, but we knew that we hadn't gotten it from each other. So we were going through it at the same time.
Yeah.
So that was ironic.
So this was also about the time that the vaccine was coming out. Like that would have been about the time that they were giving the vaccine to first responders and those sort of first tier educators and things like that. Do you remember how you felt or what you thought when the vaccine came out?
I mean, I was excited. I wanted to get it, as soon as possible. Which I remember I didn't make the first cut, because people at risk and they technically considered being overweight a risk, and I was just like 5 pounds underneath the weight limit, and I was like, oh, give me.
That's the only time I've ever heard someone said that they were 5 pounds under a weight designation.
It's because I always fluctuate so much, and I had weighed myself, and it was whatever. Because all my friends had got it. My mom got it because she was a teacher. My dad refused to get it, which my grandma was even against it. She's like, I've had COVID. I don't need a vaccine. I've had it.
Mm-hmm.
She did eventually get it. But
was anyone worried about the vaccine itself, or was it more an issue of supply and demand?
No, my sister to this day has not been vaccinated. Which she actually got it a second time earlier in the year, because she was afraid that it was going to make her infertile.
So that was a rumor that was going around, right?
Yeah. So she was scared of that, but in those first couple months when they first made the vaccine available, my sister was like, I don't know, maybe. And my mom was like, go get the vaccine. Which, my mom is a firm believer in science. She's a biology teacher. And she's like, go get the vaccine, which I had no problems with, but she was trying to convince my dad and everyone to go get it. And so me and my mom, we got vaccinated the first chance we got. I was fully vaccinated in April. But it was never a problem supply and demand. It was just, they thought that it wasn't, my grandma thought it wasn't necessary. They thought it was not necessarily going to help. My sister thought it was dangerous and whatever.
So it was more an issue of either hearing something that made you think that it was dangerous or just that it wasn't going to be effective.
It wasn't going to be effective. I never heard them say the word microchip, but, my grandparents kind of follow, that kind of news outlet type.
Like what would be an example of the news outlets that they would watch?
My grandpa religiously watches Fox Business and like Fox News, and they get a lot of their news from Facebook. They see a lot of articles, and they take it as a word. My dad deleted his Facebook and got Parler. Yeah, that was a really high point of contention because not only did he delete Facebook, he deleted his profile off of Facebook, and so all the pictures and tags that we had him in, those went away. But they listen to people and politicians who are like, this isn't worth it, this isn't,
So that would have been spring 2021.
Yeah.
So there was a big movement there from a lot of politically conservative leaning people there was a lot of contentions. There was a pretty public movement to try and switch to Parler. Like that was a big push in some conservative channels. Maybe do you want to explain briefly what Parler is? I'm not asking you to have any judgment about it, but
No,
just
it's
for some
fine.
context, what Parler is.
Okay, so Parler is a social media platform that gained a lot of traction for allowing free speech, and that it doesn't, you can say whatever you want on it, and not have a lot of repercussions, not have it taken down, because there are not a lot of regulations on it. And a lot of members of, conservatives, a lot of the right-leaning, some Republicans who followed a certain president named Donald Trump tend to gather on that app. And a lot of people use that as a way to socialize instead of Facebook, because Facebook had implemented a lot of restrictions about hate speech and such.
Yeah, so they were flagging a lot of
Yeah.
things that they were designated as hate speech that
Yeah.
were not necessarily. And this was after the sort of transfer of power between Trump and President Biden, where there was the January 6th and insurrection, and so there was some conflict with people around what happened with that. That was really the answer, that was one of the things that came about. It was like, we'll start our own thing and say what we want to say.
Mentioned insurrection, and my grandparents and my dad were in the kitchen watching Fox, and I was in the living room watching CBS.
Oh, on January 6th?
Yeah, we were watching two different news channels, and,
So that obviously stands out in your mind.
Yeah, which was a big, representative of our ideologies, and, it kind of showed through us wanting to get our vaccines. I think my grandma and I think my grandpa got his vaccine because his doctor was really pushing for it.
Mm-hmm.
My grandma, held firm and was like, I don't need it, whatever. And then she went and got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because we were supposed to go to Hawaii in July, and if she had the vaccine, it would go by a lot smoother. Mm-hmm. And so she went and got it.
So that was the motivation for her.
That was what ultimately got her to do it, which it also was for my dad. That's what my dad did. Mm-hmm. But he got it a lot quicker than that, and he got a 2-dose Moderna, I think. Mm-hmm. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, with that sort of diversity and perspective in news and things like that, mm-hmm. Did you ever have any tension within the household of what was going on, or did you all just, because it kind of sounds like you were just rolling with things as much as you could through a lot of this, but maybe I'm interpreting that wrong.
Well, I like to keep a lot of opinions to myself because I don't like it when people, project their ideologies on a lot of people. My dad hates masks. He hates them so much, which it started because he didn't like how they felt on his ears and his head and whatever. But, he doesn't think that they did anything. He thinks they're pointless. So they're, very much against it. They're, whatever. And then me and my mom are like, no, science, shows that this is important, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so, trying to keep us away from conflict, we didn't really push it too much, but
so did you go to Hawaii?
We did make it to Hawaii. We were actually originally supposed to go in 2020, and then obviously that got pushed back, and so we made it to Hawaii in the beginning of July, just after the 4th of July, and we did it was really difficult to get into Hawaii, because they had a lot of restrictions in place because, it's a small island, it's out there, and they want to protect the residents. So we had to do safe travels where we had to go get a COVID test and show all sorts of proof of vaccine and, all sorts of stuff to get to go. But we all made it.
Good.
Surprisingly, and it wasn't that bad. We had to wear our masks on the plane for, a whole 11, 12 hours, and my dad hated every minute, but he was fine with it. And by that time there weren't a whole lot of restrictions in Oklahoma. We had kind of eased off during the summer because there weren't a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. And it was different going to Hawaii where they had a lot more restrictions. And that was a hard adjustment for some members of my family, but I had no problem. I was like, yeah, I'll wear a mask. No problem.
So when you were, so that was sort of your summer, right? Like you did some
Yeah.
traveling, it sounds like you,
Yeah.
the numbers, as you said, in Oklahoma at that time period, summer 2021, were starting to kind of like drop quite a bit. And I think a lot of people were sort of feeling a little bit optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
But then sort of like coming back to school, this would have been your junior year.
Yeah.
Junior/senior.
Yeah, that's another thing that came out of COVID.
Yeah.
I'm finishing my degree in 3 years, which
talk
would
to
not
me
have
about
happened.
that. Yeah.
Well, it all started with that first summer in 2020 when I decided to take 6 hours. That's a lot to take over the summer, you know. And the more that I took, like I just kept adding my classes because it's online, you know. It doesn't require a whole lot of time, and you know, especially with professors cutting back workloads, like it was really easy to get a lot of stuff done. And I came back in August 2021 and I was like, okay, so just looking at this is right, you know, confirming my credit hours. And they're like, okay, yeah, so here's your road to graduation. You'll take 15 this semester, 15 next semester, and then you only have 9 left in the fall of 22. And I was like, I'm not going to be full-time that last semester. And I was like, I don't want to be up here and paying to live, you know, all that to be part-time. And so I squished in all those extra hours, which was a bad decision.
Why do you think so?
Well, last fall of 21, I took 19 hours, which is the maximum amount of hours you can take without getting extra permission to do so, which was fine at first. And then I added on 2 short courses at the end. You know, that was when I reached the 19 hours. And I took one class, is a geography class that I was just taking extra. It wasn't a part of my minor. And it was an 8-week course, and I was dealing with some health issues at the time that weren't necessarily hindering my ability to do my work. It was just, you know, weighing on my mind a lot. So I wasn't always there. And then the professor had a health issue too that prevented him from doing a lot of like posting and grading and stuff. And so he ended up pushing back a lot of our assignments until the last 2 weeks of class, dead week and finals week, which I'm pretty sure he couldn't do. But I was drowning in schoolwork at the time because I had 16 other hours that I had taken. And I also had that health issue, which I was like going to appointments in OKC for like regularly. And so I ended up not passing that class. So I should have finished my degree in May, but I'm taking 3 hours of the summer to fix that one class.
Yeah.
And so I did all that. And so, you know, because of COVID, I've shoved in my degree in 3 years, which, you know, I didn't come in with a whole lot of credit hours like most people do who graduate in 3 years. And so I'm very burnt out because I've taken a lot of online classes and they've all shoved in. So,
yeah. Looking backwards, would you have done anything differently?
Oh yes, I don't get me wrong. I love all the classes that I've taken. There were a couple that I did not like that much, but you know, it's whatever. But I wish that I had spaced out this last year a little bit more, because I took, you know, the maximum amount of hours. Which I took 6 hours over winter break for intercession this past winter, which was fine, but I had a surgery over that time, and so that was rough too. And so, you know, now here I am. I just turned 21 in February, so I'm young, and I'm going to get my master's. You know, I'm going to grad school, and you know, I'm struggling to complete assignments because I'm burnt out, and like mentally I'm just like all over the place and I can't focus, and yeah.
Are you doing anything to give yourself some time and space? Like if you're going to graduate, have you already had plans for?
So I mean, this semester I say I've taken a step back, I'm still enrolled in a lot of hours. Like I think I'm still enrolled in 19, but because those 6 hours that I took over winter break count for this semester, I'm technically only in 12, which is really nice. I took a 1,000 level survey course, which has been great. It's really weird being a senior. I'll be doing my thesis research on my computer in class while everyone else is like furiously taking notes, and I'm like,
I mean, maybe that's a good thing because you already know the content. Because
yeah, it's art history survey, and I was like, oh, history, okay, art, okay, that works. But so this semester, in terms of like my class load, has not been a whole lot, which is really nice because I've been able to focus on other things like applying to grad school and figuring out housing and all the other things that come along and doing oral history interview.
Yeah.
If it was last semester, I would not have been able to do this. I would have been like, no.
Yeah, understandably.
But I have a lot of time this semester to do things, which is nice.
So have you lived in residential halls this whole time?
I have. I have stayed, this is a year I had a private room, but for my first 2 years, I shared a room in a traditional style housing, which is, not common at all. But I mean, in Stout, the community before COVID was very much people who stayed there their full 4 years and lived in traditional style housing, and, they had game night and, had friend groups and all that stuff. There's still some graduate students who go here that come and hang out with their friends that they made in undergrad,
So how has it changed there? I think that's a good thing, right? Like you talked about pre-COVID. How's it changed over time?
Oh my goodness, it has changed so much. It's the Honors College Living Learning Program. So you have to be in the Honors College to live in Stout. And before, it was a lot of nerds. I'm going to be honest. They're really proud to call themselves that.
Are you counting yourself in that?
Not necessarily. I am not quite as dedicated to my classes and studies as some people are. I'm very much a procrastinator, wait till the last minute kind of gal. But they're also, they love to dress up and, they play games and stuff, and I'm not like that. I'll sit in my room and read, thank you very much. But it was always such a big thing, and, they did game nights with the dean and, his dogs, and, they used to have this thing called Stout Weekly where they met up every week and talked about events and stuff, and that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, the demographic has changed. We have a lot of students who aren't necessarily, that group that bond over, their games and all sorts of stuff. It's very different, We can't have a really nerdy event, because people won't come to it. So we have to make sure that we're trying to be inclusive to everyone. Like we have a lot of people who are, we have some people who are in Greek life, which is, kind of new. But it's not as involved as it used to be in Stout, where you would have like people always in every single lounge playing games, or, you just don't have that anymore, which is crazy.
So when did the lounges open up?
They eventually in spring 2021, they opened them up to where people could store the food and like cook in them, but you still couldn't hang out. And then this year they finally opened them up to whatever, which some people have taken art to. There is one group of students that still kind of resemble Old Stout, and they spend all of their time in the third floor lounge, always like cooking and hanging out and doing all sorts of stuff. And so,
are those upper level students that would have been there before 2020?
There's a couple of upper level students that kind of came in around the same time I did. That they grew up with that, and so they've kind of adopted some freshmen, and so it just kind of passes down through the thing. So
yeah. But it sounds like you're not seeing the same level of like socialization and community.
Yeah, it's definitely different. Because before the pandemic, in places like University Commons, where most freshmen tend to live because that's where most traditional style housing is also newer. You don't have a super huge community where you spend all of your time together, you're just kind of there. You could go the entire year without knowing your neighbors. So it's kind of like that now, just a little bit, but it's more involved than other residence halls, I say. I think we've managed to stay more involved because of that history, but it's definitely been hurt, and who knows if it'll ever get back to the way it was before.
Yeah. Are people still wearing masks in the dorm building, out in the commons areas?
Not really. I mean, it depends on, the person. There are some people who still wear their masks all the time. But, I mean, even this year, you'd almost never see people wearing their mask.
Yeah.
I mean, if they feel sick, they feel like they might, and they go get tested, they'll wear their mask. But then, of course, as soon as they get that negative test, they'll just, nope.
Yeah.
But we don't wear our masks to go to the bathroom anymore, which is really nice. But no, there's almost no restrictions in the hall. I mean, there's always keeping things in mind. Like there's a lot more hand sanitizer, and there's a plexiglass shield at the desk, but no mask.
When's the last time you got a COVID test?
The last time I got a COVID test was actually right before spring break. We had leftover airline credits from when our trip to Hawaii got canceled. And so we went on a cruise to Cabo that left out of Long Beach, which that was also really weird. But we had to get our routine test done, and so.
Oh, so it was part of travel.
Yeah, which we also tested right before we went to Hawaii, and I think I've only been tested probably 5 times, and only one of them has come back positive. So.
Yeah. All right, let me think here about this. So imagine someone listening to this sometime in the future, 20 or 30 years, right?
Yeah.
And they're trying to understand what the heck was going on, right? Think about the things that you have learned and the things that you've experienced, and what do you think it's important for people looking backwards to really know about the last couple of years related to COVID?
It sucked for everyone.
Yeah, explain.
It didn't matter, what your life was like before, something changed. So many things happened, even, today, if someone coughs around me, I'm freaking out about it. So if your parents or your grandparents are super weird about people coughing in, personal space, that's why. I mean, it'll tone down, but if someone's being especially gross and it's just no. But things changed. If it, everything.
What do you wish? What do you think worked well, and what do you think you want people to learn from and not do again? If this situation comes up, if we're in a global
not everything can be online. Not everything can be online. Some things need to be in person. You have to have that human interaction. It's so important. You think that you're doing fine, for the most part. I mean, you're back in your room, you're nice and snuggled, you're wearing pajama pants in a Zoom meeting, and everything feels fine. And then you get back out and go to a restaurant, and you're okay, I feel a lot better now. And you don't realize that you felt really bad in the first place. It takes a long time to get to the point where we realize that it is really bad. But not everything can be online. And, sometimes pushing people into things like that isn't going to work. There are going to be people who don't agree with all of that, and they will fight to their wit's end to have it not happen.
You mean the masking and
masking and distancing, and people will blatantly ignore the sign that says exit only and walk right in. Yeah. There's only so much you can do. But moving it online is not the answer.
I think that's helpful to know that, especially from your perspective, that
Yeah.
it wasn't, there were side effects greater than COVID precaution, right? What made you decide to go into grad school immediately? Like, no pause. You just talked about how exhausted you are and how everything.
That's one of my biggest hesitations right now is that, I pushed myself so much in my undergrad. I've shoved it all in, but there's not a whole lot of career options that I know that I'll enjoy if I don't go to grad school, because I'm looking at all these job postings and it's like, you can do a bachelor's, but you need this much experience, or you could just have a master's, and it's a lot easier to continue on in your education instead of taking a gap. It's a lot harder to go back to school, which my mom went back to school and she tells me, she's like, no one does that. It's so hard to do. But I mean, part of the reason why I feel like I can go straight to grad school is because, it's back in person a little bit, it's not as bad, but I did it I did my undergrad in 3 years. I'm not ready to leave Stillwater. I didn't get the traditional college experience by any means at all. And so, by going to grad school here, like almost immediately afterward, like it's just going to be like I finished my bachelor in 5 years instead of coming out with a master's.
So what do you hope that you're going to be able to do over the next couple of years that will give you that more traditional college experience that you haven't been able to do up to this point?
Well, I really hope that I get like a really good group of friends and we can go on weekend trips. I've never been on like a there's people in college who they're like, oh, you guys want to go do this weekend? And they're like, yeah, and then they go. That didn't happen because nobody could do that. I think I did that once. We went to Pops on Route 66 my freshman year, like within the first 2 weeks, and that was the most that I ever did. But I'd love to be able to do more of that. I just turned 21. I've been to the bars once, and that was with people that I didn't even know. I took a malted beverage class with the School of Hospitality, and that was fun. And then we went out to the bars after, and that was fun. Which all of my friends are currently freshmen because I live in a traditional style dorm. They all just turned 19 like within the past month, and which they introduced me to one of their friends last night. And they're like, "You're 21." I said, "Thank you. That makes me feel so great."
Tell them 2 years older, but it's a world away, right?
It's a world away. It's a different maturity level, but I really just want to be able to like learn in an environment and do more class projects. I'm in a historical preservation class right now, and we're doing fun projects. I did get to do a lot of stuff during my undergrad that I would not have been able to do without COVID. I got an internship, which was nice, but it was all on Zoom. And so I hadn't met any of these people in person. I had not been to where I would have conducted the interview originally. Like, I want to be able to go explore these places and interact and network with people.
Which that project was with me.
Yeah, that was with you.
Yeah.
It was so exciting.
Yeah, we met in person for the first time today, and we met virtually probably weekly for 8-10 weeks.
Yeah, you wrote me a letter of recommendation, and I'm just helping you.
That's right.
It's so crazy. But I want to be able to have experiences. Like I've experienced, OSU, I've experienced football, and I've experienced homecoming. I've really experienced homecoming, which, is so fun. But, the in-person class experience and, I need to take my time with my master's. And so hopefully I'll be able to do that.
Yeah, no, I hear you. All right. I don't have anything else to ask. Is there anything that you wished that I would have asked about or that you'd want to talk about that I did not ask about?
Not really that I can think of. I mean, it's 2022 and it feels like 2019 just happened. You know, I graduated high school in 2019 and here I am graduating college and I feel like it just happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like so many things have happened in the 2 years that COVID has happened. And it went by so fast because I was in a room staring at a computer screen. And when I wasn't staring at a computer screen, I was staring at my phone for a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And there were so many things that I've accomplished, but I don't feel like I accomplished because I didn't actually do. So just do things in person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I hear that. I think you talked really well about the concrete sort of ways that being a young adult has been really challenging over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, I do appreciate your time. I appreciate your honesty. And I think it is really an important perspective to share, because we don't want to leave out how, you know, especially people that are finding these really important life transitions, like going out and being an adult for the first time.
Yeah.
Has really been impacted and challenged in some of these spaces. So
yeah.